Hello world, Great Giza Pyramid. Let's start. We got a structure in the middle of the desert. Now all by itself it would be wonderful, but we actually have another structure right next to it, tiny bit taller in elevation, but because this is actually at a higher elevation, this one actually has a larger mass. We'll get to that in a minute. This one at a tiny bit higher elevation again, 1/2 the height. It's actually 1/2 the height of this one. If you were to, so it's 1/2 the difference between there and there. Boom. This one is said to be about 215 feet tall, 71 feet tall. I think it's 471. And this one is 450. This one is taller because it's got the smooth area up at the top that may or may not have had some magic pyramidion. This area, definitely no pyramidion. It's 11.7 meters by 11.7 meters. That breaks down into 38 feet. It's 38 feet squared. No magic pyramidion up there. 38 feet squared at 30 feet tall. That would be one huge chunk of gold. Wasn't there, didn't happen. Especially when you look at pictures of the top there. This 38-foot square section has actually a dimple to the north side, and it's got like a little lowered area, pool area, recessed area along the side there. Today we put a nice antenna on the top to alleviate the buildup of static electricity, but it's the buildup of static electricity which this structure was engineered to actually withstand and retain. One of the ways they did the retention of it was they lobbed off the top. The other way is at the 35th level there's a ring around the entire thing. It's about 60 centimeters tall and 60 centimeters in depth between that and the step above and below it. So it's a nice large barrier that the static electricity has to build up to jump. So it retains it on there. Now, other features, which you can find at surface.greatgizapyramid.com, where this gentleman was nice enough to map out the entire structure, even counting all four corners individually. You can see all the numbers on that website when you go to it. And the entire structure has a sweeping pattern. Now, this sweeping pattern is actually going to help push the static electricity to the top of the structure. And the sweeping pattern, in addition to there, has two other spots that have a larger than normal step. One is at the 50% mark, which marries here. The other one, oh, and that's also the area where the conduits that lead into the king's chamber come from. They don't show you this in school, do they? And then the other one is right here. This one is actually the second largest of these three, and that one lines up with the area on here where it goes from larger steps to smaller steps. So it goes from being step like so to then being step like so. And it's not quite that drastic. Maybe it is. It's about half the size. It goes from being like 40 centimeters down to being like 20 centimeters. But either way, this structure is symmetrical, and then it gets bigger. So it's well, I drew that horribly. You have to give me a lot of artistic license. And that's the way this structure is. This structure, just so we can get by it here, it has larger steps near the bottom, not as large as this particular step, just slightly smaller. And then it gets smaller about 20% of the way, and then smaller again, and then smaller yet again, and then smaller yet again. Now it's actually, when you look at it, it comes across the face. It doesn't just, it comes at an angle. And, well, we can debate about why later. It's just a factoid. The, up into here, got the king's chamber. This comes across, comes down, and you got your king's chamber in there. And you got other major piece would be the Grand Gallery. Grand Gallery comes down to an elevation just below this 35th level. It's also where the Queen's Chamber is located, right below the 35th level. Get your nice hallway going across there. Has a deeper pool on this side. What they like to call the ascending shaft that goes down meets the descending shaft that goes down, way down into the bottom of the structure, where you've got what they like to call the unfinished room, dead end tunnel, pre-subterranean chamber. They've got an offshoot that goes off into the wall, goes up to the area that's the grotto, which is at ground level, where it has another pit in there. That pit and this pit are the only two areas that this whole structure touches earth. Nothing else touches earth, with the exception of one little granite thing right there that shorts the water coming down into the system, but we'll get to that in a minute. Then here, you've got a couple of rings, like Faraday rings, the things you put on power cords, keep static electricity hum down. That will keep the system inside, isolated from the system outside, along with a couple other features we're going to go over real quick. Grotto area. This is going to be, when you fill this with water, basically simple electrolysis. We're going to have to put the edge of the structure right there because the inlet is at the same elevation as the hallway. And you'll see why in a second here. Simple electrolysis. Oxygen is going to come off this side. It's going to bubble out of the system up. It's going to fight through the loosely fitting rocks, which I'm going to tell you is a little bit more than loosely fitting rocks, especially when they give us some of the instruction manuals on the outside of it as to what they're doing. That this brought the water level by going through a bubble chamber down to just below this hallway, so that this pool within the structure is kind of isolated from the rest of the structure, creating again a gap, and the oxygen that's coming up, that's fighting through the loosely fitting rocks, which I say is a little bit more of a double bubbling chamber, would create an oxygen gap there as well. Again, separating the system within the structure from the outside world itself. Again, the hydrogen, which is going to go out those holes that are drilled in the southern wall of the grotto that they say are for the king to hide scrolls, even though this was supposed to be a well shaft, that would make no sense. But those go into the structure where the structure is actually sitting on a bath of limestone. Everything else in here is encased in limestone, with the exception of, like I said, the two areas that touch earth. And from there it's piped up above the king's chamber into what they like to call the relieving chambers, where they find shells and seeds and dust that they can't account for, which I will tell you are brought with the updraft of the hydrogen into the upper areas, and those are the particulates of impurity within the water that are brought up with the gas. Gas is brought up to the top, where through the way that the room is engineered, nice squared room, with to the side it's got a square with an area protruding out, so that area kind of looks like so, with the opening that is the end of the shaft that will allow a spark to be generated. That little spark will burn the hydrogen and oxygen together. Now, to prevent a flashback, in the would be the northern western corner, there is a pit. Within that pit, it is designed in such a way so that the gas came down into the room, bubbled through, and then bubbled out and up into the well and then to floor level. So the gas would be separated by water and would not have a flashback. That's your flashback arrestor. That is a like design to what they're doing over here that brought the water level down. But the specifics of that, we can play with the valves and stuff to play with the tension right now to bring the water level down. Or we can actually go through and engineer it the way they did, which I think would be much better, but either way, we're just going to make it work. But that's what they were doing. They brought the water level down. Now the water level on the outside of the structure is about halfway into the room. It's below the 35th level, but above the entrance, obviously. And this would add pressure to this gas so that this would push down, and we've got some other plays involved as to exactly what's happening within that whole section. Now, this area over here, its section is actually a little bit at a higher elevation, which I kind of have there, and its section is at an elevation where the water level is going to be like so. The water level is just below where it changes to the course of the second steepest, of course. Now, it's not steepest, it's depth and elevation. So elevation, of course. And this one comes down to a hallway that goes down, over, and back up. And it's got a second hallway that goes over and up. Now, this hallway is done in such a way that there's a lip here and a lip here. So whatever gases generate here bubble up and out here. The water level is such that it actually kind of comes out, if I was going to draw it properly, comes out just above that, so the water level does not come in this side. This surface comes out to the surface. The water level would be that at that elevation, but the pools don't match, don't marry. Can't tell you why. I just know what it's doing, and we can figure out the whys when we actually model this. But this is done with a lip right here, so that the gases in here would allow for this entire area to push down. And again, I don't know why. I can just tell you what it's doing. You also see in here where the lid is that there's a channel that goes around what they like to call the sarcophagus in that room, and that would allow for whatever condensation is happening on the lid to come down and circle around it. Again, don't know why, just tell you what it's doing. This section over here, this one is such that the water level, there's a conduit on the east side that is just below the water level. We're talking like maybe a foot or two that goes up into the structure, and then you've got that whole area within there that comes down, a big room, down a second big room. This comes over, comes up, and comes outside on the north. So it actually would go to the north. This, the east, this, the north. And this room, in middle room in there, is actually at a 45-degree angle itself. So I don't know exactly what they're trying to demonstrate with there, but there's definitely a reason for they're doing it the way they did it. Probably somehow it is supposed to give us some information. Just like how the fins in here line up with the elevations of the change in coarsenesses. So you got stuff, and then they threw rocks on top of it so that the communication was not lost through the function of the machine. And within the niche in the Queen's chamber, there also was a lot of dirt and stuff in there before we pulled it out to get the communication within there. And the communication within there, you can see, is the elevation of the floor as it goes deeper into there, and then the edges of it, they line up with the teeth on the niche, and those probably tell us some pressures and things, but I haven't exactly figured out the communication on that. Although, if you pay attention to Carl Monk and the pyramid matrix, you can see a lot of the communication. It's kind of like seeing the Roman numerals but not knowing the words in between them. And that's what I'm working on, is getting the whole scenario. But, I think that kind of goes over a bunch of the areas. I'd be happy to go into any area in depth. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thanks. Later, bye.